Hi, I'm Mike Booth, and this is Holly Dixon. We're with the Alaska Department of Fish and Game Division of Sport Fish. We're the Lower Cook Inlet area managers out of the Homer office. And today we're going to be presenting you tanner crab fishing in Kachemak Bay. Tanner crab fishing in Kachemak Bay is a pretty unique opportunity here in South Central Alaska, kind of different than anything else. Tanner crab in Kachemak Bay are a limited resource that provides a small harvest opportunity for those with boats that can get out on the water in Kachemak Bay. Maybe you want to go crabbing in conjunction with trolling for winter kings, or you're just looking for another excuse to come to Homer and go fishing this winter.
Okay, so we'll get started here by going over what we're going to talk about today. Of course, we'll get to the good stuff pretty quick and talk about how to actually go tanner crabbing and where to go fishing in the bay. But first, we'll just explain the structure of this fishery and how we got here with a little bit of background information. Talk about the fishery this winter, how it's structured, and the regulations that you need to know to be able to go out. Of course, the gear and how to fish for tanner crab, where to go fishing, determining legal crab once you have some in your pot, caring for your crab once you get them home, reporting online and getting your permit online, and then the recent fishery data since 2017. And finally, we'll wrap up with a couple of the common questions we get from you guys a lot. Okay, so to get started here, explaining the fishery structure, we choose one of two fishery structures based on trawl survey results. So to break those down most simply, we have two options. The first one is basically either no survey occurs or we have a small abundance estimate of legal male tanner crab. If we have either of those two things happen, we have the limited fishery structure, which is what we have this winter. We didn't have a trawl survey this past summer, so we're back to the limited fishery. It includes 3 legal male tanner crab per day as the bag limit, the annual limit of 20, season of October 1 through the last day of February, and then a gear limit of 1 pot or ring net per person, and the same for a vessel. The other option with the trawl survey results is a larger abundance estimate, so a recent 3-year average of legal males of 200,000 or more. And in that case, we wind up with the standard fishery. So that would be a bag limit of 5 legal male tanner crab, an annual limit of 40, a season that goes September 1 to March 15, and then the gear limit is 2 pots or ring nets per person instead of 1.
Basically, this fishery structure provides a harvest opportunity regardless of the trawl survey to estimate the abundance of legal male tanner crab, or when we do have a survey and the abundances are good enough and sufficient, it provides additional harvest opportunity.
Okay, so this trawl survey we're talking about, it's been occurring since 1990 in most years. You can see here on this gridded map of Kachemak Bay, there's about 39 stations that we conduct a trawl in. On this map, you can also see the depth contours of the bay. So we capture tanner crab in the trawl, and for every tanner crab we capture, we count it, of course. We measure it, we determine if it's a male or female, and then we assess the maturity on each crab. There's quite a few different abundance estimates or other metrics that we get as the results of this trawl survey, but the most important one for managing this fishery is the abundance estimate of legal male tanner crab. You can see it here on this graph. There's years on the x-axis and then the estimated abundance from the trawl surveys going up on the y-axis. So the black line with black circles or triangles is the abundance estimate of legal males based on the survey. So you can see since the early 90s, it's been pretty steady, but it's been declined ever since then. You can see that in the last 3 years, the abundance estimate has hovered around 100 to 200,000 legal male tanners. Okay, so like Mike mentioned, the The fishery was tied to the trawl survey results, and now it's not. So basically, prior to 2017, there was periodic closures of what we say is the non-commercial fishery, but I mean that includes sport, personal use, and subsistence fishing. Those closures were due to some low legal male abundance estimates, and then also due to the trawl survey simply not occurring due to loss of funding or other reasons. That regulation changed in 2017. So now we're able to have a non-commercial fishery regardless of having a trawl survey or not. So you can see those harvest estimates that have occurred over here in those fisheries since 2017 on the far right of this graph. So starting in 2017 too, the way we've collected the harvest data on the permits has allowed us to break it out into sport and subsistence. You can see the sport harvest is the vast majority of the harvest in these fisheries. The harvest has remained pretty stable in the last 3 years. And it's also just worth pointing out that both the limited and the standard fisheries have occurred in those last 3 years. The 2019 to 2020 season was the standard or the larger fishery, but it actually had a lower harvest estimate. And that's due to a few reasons. We'll talk about that a little later, but mostly weather wasn't as good and the Homer Harbor ended up frozen over, and then the legal male tanners weren't as easy to find. Okay, so just to go over one more time, the fishery that's occurring this winter is the limited fishery. So it's open right now, October 1 to February 28. The gear is 1 pot or ring net per person and no more than 1 per vessel. It's an annual limit of 20 tanner crab. Only male tanner crab with a carapace width of 4.5 inches or greater may be harvested. And it's worth mentioning there's both the sport and the subsistence fisheries open. I'll show you this on a map in a few minutes, but the subsistence fishery is in a much more limited area than the sport fishery. Most of Kachemak Bay is not open to subsistence fishing. Okay, so there's basically 13 regulations that you should know before you go out tanner crabbing. So this slide here, we're hoping you could even just use it as a quick reference before you go out. I'm just gonna go over them really quick here, and we'll cover the ones that are more nuanced in depth though in this presentation. So if it doesn't make sense, it should by the end. The first set of things that you need to know is the gear requirements. So your pot has to have 2 escape rings and an escape mechanism. Your buoy has to be labeled with the name and address of each permit holder fishing that pot. You can't use floating line between the pot and the main buoy. You can between the buoy and the trailer buoy. For the limits, the tanner crab that are harvested have to be males and they have to be 4.5 inches carapace width or greater. And then there's the limits associated with each fishery that I just went over. So the limited or standard fishery. And then the other requirements that are worth mentioning here, you must have your signed permit with you while you're out harvesting tanner crab. You can't put the pot back down into the water with crab in it. You must record your tanner crab harvest before you conceal the crab or leave the fishing grounds. The crab must remain whole until you get off the boat. And then you must report your permit online, even if you got a permit and you never ended up going out crabbing. Okay, so we're getting back to the good stuff here. Where is it open to crabbing? This is a map of Cook Inlet and North Gulf Coast areas. It's open everywhere you can see on this map. So the gray areas are open to sport fishing only. The more dotted or gridded areas are open to sport and subsistence. So it's worth looking at the areas near the Homer Harbor here, D and E and F a little bit, but most of Kachemak Bay, where most people go and harvest tanner crab, is only open to sport fishing. Okay, so what do you need to go tanner crab fishing? Well, there's kind of a list here, so we'll go through it all. First off, a boat might be obvious, but figured it's worth putting on there. You can't get anywhere without it. Then you need a way to pull your pot. So you can either go with a pot puller. If you don't have one, an anchor retriever with a buoy works just fine. You need something to catch the crab with, so a pot or a ring net. For each pot, you need 600 feet of sinking line. You need an A1 size buoy and trailer buoy. A boat hook or a long gaff is really helpful to grab that buoy when you pull up to it to pull the pot. For bait, there's lots of stuff that works, basically anything stinky, but you might want herring, octopus, fish carcasses, anything like that. Bait hangers and containers will help you keep the bait in the pot. Rulers are really helpful. You got to measure those crab before you decide to keep them. And then a cooler or tote to keep your crab in. And the other thing you need to go tanner crab fishing is good weather. So we recommend trying an app out that has it all in one place. NOAA puts out buoy data and a marine forecast. You can find those online or on these apps. And it'll give you a pretty good idea of what the seas and wind might be like. Okay, so getting into the pot requirements. Each pot has to have an escape mechanism. I'm going to go over that in a minute, so just leave that be. Each pot also has to have 2 escape rings, no less than 4 3/8 inches of the inside diameter. You can see that in the lower right picture there, what that looks like. And then the buoy or trailer buoy has to be labeled, so you need what it says you need there. The first initial, last name, and home address of each person that's fishing out of that pot, and then the vessel name or AK number of the vessel being used to pull the pot.
These pot requirements are basically the same as all statewide pot requirements for sport fisheries, commercial fisheries, personal use fisheries. So for those of you that are participate in Prince William Sound shrimp fishery, these should sound pretty familiar to you.
Yeah, and then you can see in the lower left there, if you're curious what a buoy and a trailer buoy looks like, that's the setup there. Okay, so these escape mechanisms, well, there's 2 kind of pots. So first, mesh-sided pot is very common. So it needs to have an opening on the side of the pot, but within 6 inches of the bottom, or excuse me, it needs to have the escape mechanism within 6 inches of the bottom on the side. It's at least 18 inches long, laced closed with the rotten cotton or the 100% cotton twine that's no larger than 30 thread. You can only knot it at each end of that. You can see that pretty well in the red twine here in the image. So your other option for a pot is a rigid sided pot. So the escape mechanism for these pots must be at least 12 by 8 inches and just 1 single loop in each corner with the same type of cotton twine.
These escape mechanisms are designed to give away quickly for when pots are lost, and it prevents retaining animals in them when the pot is lost. So this is a good safety precaution for losing pots that's not going to be detrimental to the animals that end up going in them.
Okay, so one of the requirements we mentioned is using sinking line. So you have to use sinking line between the main buoy, between the main buoy and the pot. The only exception is you can use floating line between the main buoy and the trailer buoy. We recommend that because when you pull up to this pot, it's going to be a lot easier to grab that line with a boat hook. Okay, so there are other types of gear you can use besides a pot. The main one is ring nets. In this limited fishery, pots and ring nets are the only legal gear. So a ring net is cheaper, it's easier to pull by hand, but it doesn't actually trap the crab. You can see an example of what it looks like here on the right hand side. So it's open on top, there's a chum bag hanging in the middle. And then there's other gear that can be used, but it's only legal in the standard fishery and it's pretty rarely used. All right, So bait and setting up your pot. To bait the pot, you usually want two different kinds of bait. So there's hanging bait and then there's a chum bag. The hanging bait is stuff like pink salmon, pollock, or other fish carcasses. You would typically put it on a hook. You can see those in the lower left corner in the right hand side of that picture. So you thread that hook through the carcass somehow or through the jaw of a pink salmon and then hang that in the pot. A chum bag is typically used for smell, so you want to make that really stinky. It's what's going to attract the crab to the pot. Use anything, but old halibut, herring, old roe, anything that stinks.
The hanging bait is giving the crabs something to actually feed on when they get in the pot. A lot of pots that you see are the most common ones are these pyramid style pots that you see here in this picture. Crabs can come and go pretty freely in those. And so to keep them in there, it's good to have something to feed on them or something for them to feed on. Putting pink salmon or pollock, it's good to actually like make some cuts in the fish itself so the crab have a place to actually get started and start eating on that. And then, yeah, something to think about when you get into fishing for tanner crab more frequently is, these fish like pink salmon that are allowed, sport caught pink salmon that are allowed to be used for bait, or pollock or other fin fish that don't have a bag and possession limit that are allowed to be used for bait. You can keep those and have some use for them later on, turning fish that you don't necessarily want to eat into crab. So pretty cool.
All right, and then setting up the rest of the pot, making sure you're ready to go. So you need a bridle on the top of the pot to tie your main line onto. So that'll typically just go between two diagonal corners, so when you lift the pot up by the main line, it's going to stay straight up and down. You need a tonal for the opening. You can see that on the top of the pot in this picture here. They're typically tapered, so the crab can get in, but it's maybe a little bit harder for them to get out. Oopsies. The other thing you need to have your pot ready to go, or that's really helpful too, is just to have the pot puller already on the line. So you can see it in that middle picture there. So when you set the pot, you can clip it onto the main buoy there. And then when you pulled up and you're ready to go, you unclip it from the main buoy and get your anchor buoy out.
It just gives you a way of, when you arrive to your pot, to pull it, that you don't have to untie your pot buoy to get the anchor retriever onto the line of the pot.
Okay, so we go out. How do you set the pot? Well, first, just make sure your line is okay. So by that we mean, make sure it's not going to catch on anything as it goes over the gunnel. It should be coiled very nicely so it's not tangled or knotted up with itself. It's really helpful to have someone else with you, to have them drive the boat and hold it in place as you drop the pot over. Drop it over. Pay attention to the tide in other pots. Of course, pay attention to your own boat. Well, it's one of the #1 rules, but make sure you don't get that line anywhere near your outboard. It helps to use a depth finder so you know how far down you're dropping the pot. You want to drop it 350 to 500 feet, but you're going to have 600 feet of line on here. So you'll drop all the line over, but still helpful to know how much water you're in. Also very helpful to mark it on the GPS so you can get back to it. And then, try a short soak, 6 to 8 hours, see what happens.
Setting a pot from a boat is fairly straightforward, and there's just a lot of precautionary safety measures that you should take and use common sense. The calmer it is, the easier it is to get your pot set. And for some days when the tides are really extreme here in Kachemak Bay, it's best to make sure that you're paying attention to which way the current is actually going when setting the pot in relation to other pots.
Okay, so you set it, let it soak, and now you want to pull it. So we've got to find it first. Could be the hardest part when you're trying to find it. Think about the tide and what the weather has been since you've been there. Um, and once you've got it, go ahead and grab the line with the boat hook. And then there's two options. So you could use a pot puller. It's pretty straightforward and self-explanatory to pull a pot up that way. Pot pullers are more expensive, but pretty safe and easy, like I said. Then your other option is to use an anchor retriever with a buoy. So cheap, but can be risky, but plenty of people do it, especially in this fishery with small boats. So first, yeah, you'll grab the pot, and hook it onto the pot puller onto your anchor buoy, and then you'll cleat off the line. It's safer to do that from the stern typically. So start down current of the buoy, think about which way the tide is going, and then run towards the pot. So as you do that, that's going to pick up a whole bunch of the slack in the line. Be aware of other pots around you, of course, as you're doing this, and where their lines are going, based on the tide and wind. The pot is never really straight down from the buoy, so just be aware of that. Consider more than one pull with the anchor retriever and buoy setup. So it's often best to run in a circle around it once you've hooked up a lot of slack. So once you've done that, and maybe try pulling on it by hand for a bit, and then re-cleat it off and try pulling back the other way. Coil the line as you go, as you can see this person doing in the far right picture there, so you don't end up with a mess later. And then you could just put the buoy or the pot right back out. The buoy should sink when the pot is right at the surface. It won't always, but that's a good way to know that it's there. You can also just stop and look over the side of your boat and then pull it over the gunnel. So if you've got a pot full of crab, that might be easier said than done, but especially helps to have a buddy and a clear gunnel. It's not gonna get stuck on anything. Just think about the angle, and if once you get it up high enough, you can kind of rock it back and let gravity help you pull it over the gunnel onto the deck.
A couple of thoughts just with all of this. The first bullet, find it. A really interesting component of that is that pretty much everybody has the same main buoy color. And so consider coming up with a different combination for your trailer buoys, maybe 2 corks or, a very unique color, something that you're going to be able to easily identify when you get back onto the grounds. Grab the line with a boat hook or gaff. This just takes some practice, kind of like docking, but working with one person driving the boat and then the buddy grabbing the line. Ideally, you're shooting for getting the floating line that's in between the main buoy and the trailer buoy, right? Pot pullers are great, and I think those that have them should use them. Another great benefit to a pot puller is that you're likely to be able to fish that pot closer to other pots where there might be more congestion with other fishermen, which can happen at times out on the crab grounds. The anchor retriever with the buoy, I would suggest trying to do that method with an anchor first. Most likely, if you've done that, then you have a pretty good feel for how to do this. Depending on how many crab are actually in the pot pot itself, and what size pot you use, it could be anywhere from 20 pounds all the way up to a couple 100 pounds. And so, and with the marine weather being different too, when you go to do this, it's never really the same. Just be paying close attention to what you're doing and how much line you're actually picking up. As you coil line, maybe if you do a second pull, have an idea how much line you've already picked up and how much more there is to go. So some people might mark their crab line at like the halfway point or 3/4 point, so you know that you're getting close. And those really heavy pots, you're going to end up needing to actually pull some of that by hand at the end. Most of the time in the winter in Kachemak Bay, the water's pretty darn clear, and you'll be able to see that pot down there anywhere 15 to 20 feet probably. So when you see it, you'll know it, and you just got to finish it by hand. So those are some of the helpful hints that I can think about for pulling a pot.
One other thing would just be to be ready to cut it off if something really
For
went
safety.
wrong, for safety. So just have a knife nearby, and better safe than sorry, I guess. Okay, so where are you actually going to go to set this pot? The most popular place to go is close to the spit there between the spit and the islands. It's called the trench. So just say, look at your chart and find the deep water. You want to find 350 to 500 feet of water, and you might have to set your pot a couple times before you find a good spot of legal male crab. The other places that people will set pots are in Tutka Bay and then offshore of Peterson Bay there.
Most people, like Holly said, will set in the trench. The crab don't necessarily just stay in the same place. So they do move around, and sometimes they're coming out of shallower water back down into deeper water. And so not really sure when you're going out there in this area to set a pot, you'll most likely see other pots and give you some idea. But generally speaking, one of the best parts about this tanner crab fishery in Kachemak Bay is that it's actually relatively close to the Homer Spit and the harbor. So pretty cool. But in that area that you see there is kind of the key area, and people do well there, but not necessarily everywhere in there. So you're just going to have to do a little bit of fishing and find your own spot.
If you find a great other spot, just let us know.
The one thing about Tutka Bay is the later you get in the winter, the more likely there is going to be ice in there. And so you got to be pretty careful with your pot and losing gear. If there's ice in Tutka and the tide is going to start coming out and taking ice out of Tutka, it's a good way to lose your pot. In the trench, another thing to just be careful of is the ferry, state Alaska Marine Highway ferry. Its path is right through the trench, and so sometimes those pots become victim to the ferry coming by. Just if you're out there and see the ferry, make note of it.
Okay, so you've pulled up your pot and you've got some tanner crab in it. The first thing to do is to determine what's legal. So one of the first things to look at is male crab or female crab. So male crab have the narrow abdominal flap underneath there, like you can see, and then females have a wider one. So you see how it takes up most of the underneath of their carapace there versus the narrowness of the males. Females are also usually going to be smaller than 4.5 inches, but not always, and there's small males as well. But of course, those wouldn't be legal themselves.
And when you start sorting the crab that you have in your pot, go for the biggest ones first and look at those to see the difference between males and females.
Okay, so you've got males, and now you need to decide if they're legal or not. So you want to measure the width of their carapace. That it should include the spines on the sides there. And then the other important thing to note is that you need to measure the straight line distance, not the curve of their shell. So don't use a measuring tape, use a ruler. And even better than a ruler, use, what else could you use?
Basically, you can make your own set of calipers for the legal size. So you could just take a stick and and make it right at 4.5 inches if you have the measurement right. And then you can just put that on top of the crab and know if it's legal or not. It's a pretty quick way to assess legality. You know, here at work, when we're measuring shellfish, we use calipers that, you know, measure things pretty specifically, but you know, that the dimension that you need to measure is from the two sides, not across the curve of the shell. And so it has to be straight across. And then it does include the spines.
Okay, so you get something in your pot besides tanner crab. What else can you keep? You can keep octopus and things that are classified as other shellfish. So other shellfish don't include Dungeness crab or shrimp because those are closed fisheries in Kachemak Bay. And then you also can't keep halibut, or if you caught something besides a halibut, another fish out of your pot.
Basically, when sport fishing with a pot, you can only harvest shellfish in Alaska. And with that, here in Kachemak Bay, some of our other shellfish stocks that aren't doing very well, Dungeness crab and shrimp, those fisheries are closed, so you can't harvest those. But things that fall in the category of other shellfish, you can harvest.
Okay, so you've got your crab and you're going to take them home. One important thing to know is you should keep those crab alive in water ideally until you get home and you're ready to steam them and clean them. The other thing to remember is these have to stay whole until you get back to the dock. And that's so, you know, if a wildlife trooper was going to check your tanner crab, they'd be able to tell that they were of legal size and that they were males. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is clean these crabs. So you want to break them in half, remove the carapace shell on top, remove the gills and the guts. A great way to break them in half is just like on the edge of a countertop or like on the edge of the dock or the gunnel of the boat. Probably don't use the boat because you should be off of it, but something like that to break the shell. Just hold it over, you know, and use your body weight or force to break it in half. The next thing you want to do is steam them. 5 to 7 minutes is a general guideline. Everybody has their own idea, really. So look it up on Google and decide for yourself how you want to care for these crab. And then they're ready to eat. So there's a lot of great meat there in the cluster underneath where the carapace and the gills were. And there's, of course, the legs. So the most simple thing to do is eat it plain or dip it in butter. And then, you know, let your imagination run wild, really, with all the other things you could do with crab. And then some people, or a question we get, or then some people do freeze the meat. So that's, you know, that can be done. Maybe use a salt solution to help preserve the meat for longer. But consider just eating all that amazing tanner crab right when you get it.
Keeping crab alive after you catch them, keeping them in water is the best way to go. How long they will live is another common question that we'll get. And you want to make sure that you process them as fast as you can if you were driving back home from Homer to Soldotna or Anchorage, you know, in the winter. Obviously, keeping them in a cooler full of cold water. They should make it overnight or to the next morning. But they are a live critter and they need oxygen, and where they're found, the water is really cold. And so the warmer out it is, the less likely it is that they're going to survive. So these are fairly fragile crab overall. And it's just recommended that you process them as soon as you can. If it's going to be longer before you cook them, it's best that you break them and clean them instead of just trying to keep them alive. You don't want them to die with shellfish. Dead shellfish aren't as good to eat if they've been dead. The cleaning, really easy. Just shake it out. The gills on the outside of the cluster, you can scrape those off, but most of the guts on the inside, when you break the carapace, a lot of them get pulled out, and then just a couple of shakes with the cluster in your hand and should be pretty good to go. When you're going to eat these things, a nutcracker definitely helps. The shells on these can be pretty mean to bare hands. And you might want a pick or a fork to get them out of there. A lot of these crabs, particularly really late in the winter at the end of the season, are really full of meat, and it actually is pretty hard to pick these guys. So, but great and worth it.
Okay, so moving on to permits, then you have to have one to go, participate in this fishery. So we'll just go over how you get it and how to report on it really quick here. So they're only available online. You can go get it yourself and print it off at home. This is the URL to do that. So when you go to this URL, if you have it already, I'm just going to put in a plug for it. You should create an ADF&G login or profile. So that will put everything that you get from Fish and Game in one place, basically, as long as you get it out from the online store. So it would put like your hunting and fishing license here under this login. It put this permit. You've got hunting tags, they would go there too. You need one permit per person participating in this fishery. So this is a sport fishery and the permits are individual based. So it's a little bit different than a lot of other fisheries that are permit based in the state. And that's a common question we get. So yes, if you have kids and they're going to go out and harvest tanner crab, they each need their own permit as well. Okay, so once you go to the online store here and log in, and you're going to go to the fishing and shellfish permits tab. This is the first page that comes up. So you click on that in the right-hand column. And then all the permits available are going to be listed out. So you can go and filter by area and go to South Central if you want, or this permit has been right near the top. So it's the 2020-2021 Cook Inlet North Gulf Coast Sport Tanner Crab Permit. It's there's no cost associated with it. So just add it to your cart and then begin the checkout process. Another plug is to fill in your email address. Of course, if you've logged into your ADF&G profile, that's already done. But this is the primary way that we're going to contact you and tell you, updates on the fishery or remind you to report this permit. Okay, so once you've got it, print it and sign it. You have to have it on your person and it has to be signed for it to be valid while you're out fishing for tanner crab.
Another great benefit to using an email or that login, say you print out your permit, you went tanner crab fishing, and then you need to go again later and you forget where your permit is, you can't find it, you can reprint it yourself and get your old catch onto your catch log and then continue to use it. So it's a lot easier to self-help and have your permit if you use the ADF&G login or email address. Yeah, just it's a sport fishery, and so it is one permit for everybody that's participating. The limit that we said for gear is 1 pot per person per vessel. Basically, you can have on a boat, you can have 1 pot, but you can have multiple people harvesting crab out of that
one. Okay, so you got your permit and now you have to report it. So the thing to pay attention to here is you must report it, and that's the case even if you didn't end up using the permit, like you didn't go out tanner crabbing at all. And it's also the case if you went, but you didn't actually harvest any crab, you only pulled up an empty pot. We still have to get a permit report from you. So it's easy to do, and it's also all done online. So this is the URL to do it at. That's printed on your permit, and there's also one of those QR codes on your permit you can scan and get to this harvest reporting site. If you have an ADF&G profile and you're logged into it, it's really easy. So you'll go to that URL and it'll come up with this. So like this is what mine looked like, and it gave me my current permits, available for reporting, and I had gotten my 2020, 2021 sport permit, and so it just came up right away. If you're not logged in or you don't have your ADF&G profile, it's also pretty easy. So it'll come up with something that looks like this. And so you'll need your last name, your permit number, and then which permit you have. If you've lost your permit number and you you're trying to log in and get it off your profile or out of your email, it should be there, but say you can't find it, just call us at the Homer office. It's really easy for us to look this up for you. So do this, select your permit, then you'll get to something that looks like this. So it's, this is for me, this year's permit, and then add a harvest record. So I said I added a harvest record in area E and 3 tanner crab. So once you do that, you would say, you click this green button if you're all done, say you're finished, submit harvest report, and you can add a bunch of days here. Then you get to a screen where it asks you to confirm the harvest report. And then it also asks you if you're done fishing this permit for the season. So obviously if you're done, you should say yes. And if you're not, say no, but say that you tell us you're done fishing the permit and then you actually end up going out again, you can still do this exact same thing, come back in here and add another harvest record. It will let you do that. So you can do this as you go throughout the season, or you can save it till the end, as long as you don't forget. The deadline is 2 weeks after the fishery ends. So that's either March 15 or 31. This year, the deadline's March 15th because the fishery will end on February 28th. Like I said, just call us or email us. We answer a lot of questions about this. We're happy to help. It's really easy to look up. Oops. Anything to add?
No, I think that's it. That covers it well.
Okay. So say you didn't report your permit, you'll end up on something called our FTR. So what's the FTR? That's our failure to report list. Basically, this is something we've implemented for this fishery that's just there to help us get the most accurate harvest estimates we possibly can, and encourage everybody that's participating in this small fishery to report their permit. So if you don't report your permit, you're going to end up on this list and it'll prevent you from getting a permit the following year. So it's just for 1 year. And basically the process works like this. So like this year, the fishery will end February 28th. The reporting deadline is March 15th. During those 2 weeks, we'll send out reminders to everybody with a permit, likely via email, but through other avenues as well, reminding them to report. Then after March 15th, we'll have a list of all of the permit holders who have reported and who haven't. And so then we'll contact all of those who haven't, who missed the deadline, mostly via email, and give them the opportunity to appeal their placement on our FTR list. So that appeals process means that this person can provide us a written appeal and also report online. And so then we'd look over the written appeal, and if it was an unavoidable circumstance, the appeal may be approved and you would be removed from the FTR list and able to get a permit the following year. So of course there's unavoidable circumstances that happens. I mean, yeah, things happen. So if it was something like that, no problem taking off the FTR. We're just trying to get the best reporting that we can, definitely not out to prevent anyone from fishing if at all possible.
This online permit is a cost-effective way for the department to issue permits and get good harvest data. And the users, like yourself, are a vital component of that. We want to ensure that we do things timely and get our harvest estimates wrapped up as soon as the fishery is over, so we have a better idea on how the fishery might look the following year. So we really appreciate everyone, getting their permit online and reporting themselves online. This process of modernizing our sport fish licenses and permits is an improvement that we feel like it better serves anglers and helps the department at the same time. The fail to report list is just the process to ensure that people actually do report. We would like to see 100% reporting. Unfortunately, some people will not report. And so we need to use this to help us figure out how we can get our harvest estimates where we need them to be. So it's a small penalty for now. And we would like to continue to see an improvement on our reporting. And this is a small, limited fishery, or a fishery that has limited participation, but this process is likely to be implemented over other larger sport and personal use fisheries that occur throughout Alaska in the future.
So from last season, just for an example, 124 people wound up on the FTR list that can't get permits this season. So 124 out of about 1,700 permit holders ended up not reporting. So, I mean, we're very happy with everyone reporting, and it really helps us with, like Mike said, you know, the accurate harvest estimates and management for the following season.
Thanks.
Okay, so transitioning off the FTR to some of the recent fishery data, this graph here on the right-hand side has the harvest estimates from the recent years. And so, you know, basically after the FTR is established in the spring, we have the list of people that reported on time and how many tanner crab they harvested. And then we have the list of people who reported, you know, during the appeals process and what they harvested. And then we have the permit holders that didn't respond to us at all. And so we need to estimate how many tanner crab were probably harvested by those who didn't end up responding at all on their permits. And so we use the crab harvested by those who reported late during the appeals process to estimate how many crab were harvested by those we didn't hear from, and wind up with a total harvest estimate. So you can see on the right, the estimates for 17, 18, and 19, 20 are all pretty similar. Like I mentioned earlier, 17, 18, and 18, 19 were the limited fishery, and the standard fishery, the larger one, was in 19 and 20. So on average, about 8,300 tanner crab were harvested each of those winters. And, you know, there's a couple of things that went into it for the harvest being less last year with a larger bag limit, but basically legal male tanner crab were hard to find in the fall. They weren't really hanging out in the trench where most people try to go tanner crabbing. And then we got a real winter. And so the Homer Harbor was very iced over for January. When people got back out and got after the tanner crab in February and the first couple of weeks of March, that was when the majority of our harvest happened last year. In general, consistent in all years, 96 or most of the harvest, but 96% of the harvest is in Kachemak Bay. You can see those other areas up there, just barely blips at the top, especially the last few years. And then more specifically in Kachemak Bay, most of it's west of the Homer Spit, the AKA in the trench. Okay, continuing on with a little bit more about the fishery recently since 2017, there's about 1,700 people getting permits each winter, but just about 50% or a little more of those people actually end up going crabbing with those permits. You know, since we've started using this FTR process, we've had about 90% of people reporting each year, which is pretty good. And then, you know, just looking at the residency of these permit holders here, 92% are Alaskan residents. So that's a result of having a fishery in the winter for sure. And then most are pretty local to Homer here. 80% are Kenai Peninsula residents. Okay, so just a couple things to go over right here at the end, or some other questions that we get a lot. So one thing we get asked is, what's the legal size going to be this year? So really, the legal size probably isn't going to change. It did change recently. In 2017, it changed from 5.5 to 4.5 inches. And that was based on a couple things. The Board of Fish just adopted a department proposal to change the legal size because of the data that we had seen in recent trawl surveys. So first, it showed that very few males were reaching 5.5 inches. And it also showed that the size where 50% of the males were mature had decreased to about 4.5 inches. So you can see that pretty clearly in the graph over there on the right. So the years are on the x-axis, and then the size of crab is on the y. We added in the inches there. So the blue bar is 5.5 and the green bar is 4.5 inches. You can see it's hovered right about or around 4.5 since 2007, where 50% of the male crab are mature. All right, another common question we get this year anyway is, what's the annual limit, or when did you get an annual limit? Might be more like it. That happened about 6 months ago at the Board of Fish meeting in 2020, March 2020. So we added an annual limit to both fisheries, and basically it was the easiest and most simple way to just stabilize the harvest. We want to keep it where it's been. So, and we had seen that a very small percentage of the crabbers were actually harvesting a really large percentage of the crab. And so it was just a way to keep this fishery, fair and equal among the users. Okay, and then the last question that we get a lot or asked for clarification on is, how many pots can a boat operate? So this year it's 1, in years where it's a standard fishery, it's 2. So you can have, this year you could have 1 pot going off the boat, but you could have multiple permit holders on that boat. So, 1 pot, but 3 people could each take a limit of crab out of that pot, for example. Okay, and that's about all we have. We're here on the YouTube channel. Hopefully you've been chatting with us. And then if you missed us today, though, here's our number at the Homer office and our email, and feel free to contact us.
Take care. Good
Thanks.
luck.